And I'm just hoping with the things that we're sharing today and even that story that people that are listening to this that are at whatever stage in the burnout, that they're getting what they need. And if you're privileged enough, then the choices are easier sometimes to really reduce the stress in one way or another. If you're not privileged enough, then it is harder and there's a lot more pain. And what can we do to mitigate this and for you to be able to keep your livelihood and keep doing the things that you need to do?
Hey y'all, you've already got this podcast, but if you're thinking about adding coaching to your ADHD toolbox, mark your calendars, and if you can't find your calendar, grab a Sharpie and roll up that sleeve. So our next round of coaching and accountability groups is just around the corner. Join us for our next registration event on Tuesday, March 26th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific, that's 7:30 Eastern. And if you're listening to this on the day it came out, that's 1 week from today. So how can you join us? Just head on over to coachingrewired.com to get your name added to our spring interest list so you can receive your invitation to start your pre-registration process. And if you want to hear more from our group coaches, Kristen and Brian, we'll have episodes featuring both of them linked in the show notes for today's episode. And one last thing, did you know that we have a YouTube channel? And we are starting to post some conversations there more often between myself and our other coaches. So check it out by going to YouTube and searching for ADHD reWired. Otherwise, go to coachingrewired.com to get started so you can join us for our next spring registration event on Tuesday, March 26th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 Eastern. More about our coaching groups at the break. Now, on with today's show. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD reWired. Today's guest is Nate Page. Nate has some fancy titles: PhD, licensed psychologist, certified group psychotherapist, but his education on burnout has come through his own painful journey with burnout. He began presenting on burnout 7 years ago after witnessing the devastating impact of burnout and compassion fatigue on his own life and the life of so many colleagues and therapy clients. He soon was specializing in individual and group therapy services for healthcare professionals who are caught in the depths of burnout. Nate dedicates a significant portion of his career to providing education and training on these topics. And that is how I got introduced to Nate, was at the CHAD conference on his presentation on burnout that a few members of my team, I think very strategically got me to go to your session. So Nate, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I am doing great. I'm excited to be here. And yeah, it was so fun. You stayed after that podcast and we spent about 20 minutes, you and I think there were two of your coaches. And it was just such a good feeling getting to know you and them. And so to be able to play with you more today. And since then, I've gotten to know your podcast and your website, your community a bit. And you got a really good thing going here. So I'm glad to be a little part of it.
Well, thank you. You know, there was a video that you showed at the presentation of this woman who ran the marathon, right? Who was crawling her way to the last 100 feet or something. Oh man, that was really powerful. It's interesting because when we were talking during the I think our pre-interview, I think you were asking me about something about you weren't sure how kind of vulnerable I get on the podcast, and it's so interesting as I've been running ADHD reWired now for I'm coming into a decade, and have 500 plus episodes of the podcast. I have, as of this recording, we are starting our 35th season of coaching groups this week. So I've been at this for a while, and there's been this part of me that is I shouldn't talk about that. I'm been feeling kind of burnt out because what will people think, right? And then this part of me, it's well, what the fuck? I'm a human being, and I've been running a business for 10 years, and I have not really taken adequate sort of time for rest. So let's sort of talk about sort of what burnout is, some of the stigma too around burnout.
Yes.
And how do we change this?
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you're mentioning that. And those are very similar feelings that I've had in a lot of different settings of recognizing maybe I'm struggling with burnout, but it doesn't seem like anyone else is. And so if I were to talk about it, I'd be outing myself. And then who knows, maybe I'd be judged or critiqued as I'm weak or lazy or not resilient enough. But it's really fun to be So I've become kind of a burnout expert. And even when I was back doing agency work in the college counseling center where there was so much burnout, I became known as kind of the burnout guy. But it still was really hard to talk about burnout, but yet we were all experiencing it. And so it's really fun to be on podcasts or to do presentations, because then we get to have some more real talk, and it's the experience of, oh, this isn't just me, this is everyone. And at least in the healthcare field where I work, the word you see in the research a lot is it's ubiquitous. And so it's almost, I mean, synonymous with being human, I think. It's not a matter of if we face burnout, it's at what point are we in the burnout stage at different points in our life. So I think, yeah, the stigma reduction is such a fun work to do. And it's so fun to see people just kind of let down their guards a bit and be like, okay, like at the ADHD conference, there's, I don't know, 100, 150 people in the room. And we were all just kind of vibing and feeling it like, yeah, this is everywhere. And it's so nice to actually be able to talk about it.
There's a phrase that you used describing burnout. You said burnout is what? Do you know what I'm referring to?
Let's see if I can get this quiz answer correct. But yeah, it's an injury, I think is what you're getting at.
Yeah. And I just thought that idea of burnout as injury, I don't know, that really resonated with me personally. You know, one of the things I was sharing with my some members of my team was that, like, I feel like, you know, I get into these sort of states of just tiredness and burnout, and then I just kind of dig down deep and somewhere find this energy, you know, like the woman in the marathon video who crawled across the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get up and I keep going, and, you know, and doing that kind of over and over. And I think before I heard you use that phrase, I had come on this, I've kind of thought of this phrase of, it feels like I am like re-scarring burnout scars. And so when I heard you say this as burnout as an injury, I was like, okay, I really need to be paying attention more to this.
Yeah.
So how did you come up, how did, like, the idea of burnout as an injury, like, what made you come to that idea?
Well, and it's not necessarily my idea. I think that's the way that a lot of researchers talk about it. Just earlier today, there's an article, I think I have it left up here, looking at nurses and compassion fatigue, which is pretty synonymous with burnout, but compassion fatigue as bruises in the soul. So that's the title of this, you know, peer-reviewed research article in 2022. And that's a phrase you see in the literature quite a bit. It's an injury to the soul. I mean, and what burnout is it's just that experience of chronic stress, and the damage that it creates on you outpaces your ability to recover. And stress is a really valuable, desirable thing. We all want stress. And when our body can recover and respond and grow, then it makes us stronger. But then when it's too much stress, or it's, you know, every day, day in, day out, and we can't recover, then yeah, it creates the injury. And I think the analogy of like a stress fracture injury is a pretty good one, or like tendonitis or something, where for a while we're able to do things, but then once the injury sets in, you feel the pain, and it is really painful. It's a soul kind of pain. But then as human beings, and with what you're saying, we're very resilient, and yeah, we can dig deep and we can do pretty miraculous things. And so from one side, I think, Eric, what you've done to dig deep and pull up and keep doing what you're doing, it is really commendable and it's inspiring. And yeah, there's a cost to that as well, that it can.
Right. Yeah. I had a couple months ago, I interviewed someone on the podcast. Like a lot of ADHDers, I don't have that gift to remember the person's name that I talked to.
I know.
I wish I did. I wish I could say, like, it was this episode. I think it's already was released. But she was talking about how she basically was like pushing through burnout for like a decade, and she's now on disability. Like, and you know, that really kind of resonated with me, because it's this idea that, like, okay, I keep sort of like semi-ignoring, like I sort of deal with it, but then like not fully. What was your realization when you first started noticing personally for yourself? Like, talk about that story for you when you first started experiencing burnout.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first time I really remember having a strong experience with burnout, I was on internship at the University of Maine Counseling Center. And it was, I think, March or April into the academic year. and I was not at all paying attention to any burnout cues or anything. Of course, we were all struggling, and counseling centers, it is a place where there's every year increasing demand for services, a lot of students needing mental health care, a lot of crises, but not having the ability, the staffing, the time to really be able to meet that. So the burnout is pretty big in a lot of industries, but in college counseling in particular. But I was sitting with a client and I just had this feeling come up inside of me, such an aversion. It was just, I want this client out of my room right now. And it was like a kind of an overwhelming experience. And there was nothing about that particular client, but the best analogy I can come up with is when you're at an all-you-can-eat buffet and you're eating and maybe really enjoying it. Maybe it's really good food, not paying attention to your hunger cues. But then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, like not another bite. I'm never going to eat again in my life. So it was that kind of experience. And then talking with the colleagues and supervisors after that session, that's when people were starting to use that word burnout. And I was like, oh. And then just another, I guess, story several years later at a different counseling center, they actually brought in this big firm that was doing a huge analysis to try to understand the mental health needs of the students and how to better meet those needs. So they talked with the university president and all the, different departments, a lot of parents and students. And then we had a 4-hour meeting with them in the college counseling center. And we were really talking about, well, how can we improve therapy services for students and all these ideas, and teletherapy and switching the appointment lengths and all these things. But then they asked this question, well, in 5 years, what would be the ideal thing so that students were getting their mental health needs met? And I spoke up and just said, I can't picture that happening without the mental health of us, the practitioners, being intact. And the whole feel of the meeting shifted. And of course, it was really important to be focusing on the students, but it was kind of the first time that the firm, they were thinking, well, yeah, what about these practitioners? And the lead guy, he said, I'm only aware of one research article on burnout for college student therapists. But it was after that kind of one by one, a lot of the team members, they left because it was kind of clear, the writing on the wall, that we can't change this context enough, even though we're desperately trying to. We're bringing firms in, paying lots of money, but we can't. And we were privileged enough that I was able to transition into private practice, and other colleagues had, places to go. So yeah. And I'm just hoping with the things that we're sharing today, and even that story, that people that are listening to this, that are at whatever stage in the burnout, that they're getting what they need. And it is, I think, kind of a harsh reality, but a real thing with a lot of the people that I work with in therapy or in group therapy, that, we need to make some hard choices here maybe. And if you're privileged enough, then the choices are easier sometimes to really reduce the stress in one way or another. If you're not privileged enough, then it is harder and there's a lot more pain. And what can we do to mitigate this and for you to be able to keep your livelihood and keep doing the things that you need to do?
So before we discuss solutions, what are some of the things that maybe aren't clearly or immediately obvious to people that are actually signs of burnout?
Yeah, good question. So the exhaustion is a piece of it. So being more and more tired, less and less energy, less and less motivated. Of course, folks with ADHD, there's all kinds of energy regulation challenges anyway.
Yeah.
A cynicism or some sort of detachment. And so
would that be different from what the person maybe usually feels towards something?
Right.
Like a newfound cynicism?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so, if we're talking about workplace burnout, it's maybe, I loved this job. I, was really excited. I want to do well. It's meaningful to me. But then I start to lose that. It becomes more meaningless or hard, or I get more cynical or more detached, or more like I have to go into work and go through the steps, but not really be thinking about it. So I'm coping in that kind of way. And so it is a way to cope with the stress. If I can somehow detach or feel more numb or immune to it, then I'm at least not as aware of the injuries that are happening. But it can become, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm annoyed, I don't like this. What's the point of this? And then another big sign is this sense of inefficacy. I don't feel like I'm able to do what I want to do. I'm not having the impact. And And usually that starts out as a perception. It kind of feels that way, but then it quickly can become that. And then I'm not actually doing the work. I'm doing the bare minimum to not get fired maybe, or to skate by. And so it's just a way to try to survive.
Mm. And do you see that there's also like how do you sort of differentiate between like what's maybe a seasonal depression or all the different coexisting disorders that often come with ADHD?
Mm. Good question. Well, oftentimes there are co-occurring things, but burnout, in the diagnostic manual, so the international one that's used, there is a code for workplace burnout. And so you would differentiate that, the work is what's causing this stress, and the symptoms of burnout do line up a lot with depression. And so it's oftentimes in the literature called like a workplace depression. So it's a context-driven depression, situational depression. But then, of course, it can permeate all aspects of your life. If I'm really burned out at work, then I might, for a while, usually I get burned out when I go into work, and I hear people tell stories like, oh, yeah, the Monday morning and opening up that door to go into work is just, ugh. But then when I leave work for the day, woohoo, oh, I feel so much better. But it can, permeate into, all aspects of life. So that's one of the things that burnout, it's understood as that so with ADHD, it would be the mismatch between how I am and the demands, the stressors placed on me by whatever context that is, in work, school, home. And yeah.
What about like differentiating between burnout and boredom?
Good question. Say more. Like,
yeah. So when things are, not as interesting, or you're not as excited about doing a thing as you once were, like that could be part of ADHD. Like, I've been doing this for a while.
Yes.
Like, am I still interested in this, or is it just burnout? Like, I still like the thing, but there's something about how the length of it working, or how I'm feeling, that is just, I'm just not feeling excited about it anymore. Like, how do you differentiate between that?
Yeah, I think I'm understanding. And so the boredom, of course, isn't the burnout, but there'd be increased stress with that. So a lot of people with ADHD, when something is bored, it takes so much more, something is boring, it takes so much more energy to do that, to sustain the attention, to complete the task. So the amount of stress is a lot higher than it would be for other people. And it might still be boring to them, but it's less stressful. So I think the differentiation would be just the chronicness of it. And I think if your situation is demanding that you have to keep doing the boring thing over and over and over again, it'll get past the point of, oh, this is hard, it's taking a lot of energy, but it's hurting me. I'm injured with this. And then even thinking about it is, or then even things that are adjacent to it are. And so, yeah, I don't know. Hopefully that kind of gets at your question. And
yeah, because I guess I think part of the thing I'm wondering about too, is thinking about just different listeners who are listening to this right now, is how important it is when we are trying to come up with solutions for things, that we are first identifying the right problem. Because if we don't have the right problem, the chances are the solution we're going to try isn't going to be that helpful.
yes.
Right, so how do we identify, yes, this is burnout?
So the people that I work with, they're in the throes of burnout. They didn't recognize it. So my immediate reaction to that is, at least from my bias, my perspective is, oh, it's burnout before you even know it's burnout. But I might be biased, and there are probably people listening that are not in the throes. They're not the clinical level of what I see, and they are in more of that prevention place. So I work a lot essentially with the recovery. People that are burned out, they're like the marathon runner that you talked about that has hit the wall, maybe ran a little bit too fast, but now their legs buckled and they're crawling. And so that runner didn't recognize the burnout that was leading up to it all along. So I think it is a really good question. And there are assessments online. It is something I think you'd want to talk with someone and try to understand. And if you're in that place of wanting to ward off burnout, then it is, I can reduce the stress a bit. I can prune and prioritize. I can change things a bit here and there. If it's someone that's in the throes of depression, or burnout, we really need to pull out the big guns here. So hopefully that's helpful for any listeners trying to differentiate. Am I on the path to burnout and I need to make a few small changes, or No, I've been burned out for a while and ignoring it or minimizing or scared to talk about it. And
I think with
I'm really
ADHD,
injured.
I think with ADHD, it's got to be so challenging too,
Yeah.
because like I know for myself, it's like I sometimes don't really like on a particular day, especially if I'm like in the groove with something, that I don't realize that I've hit exhaustion until I like actually stop. Even just the idea of taking breaks, how helpful that is for like the longevity of focus throughout the day. Like I'm horrible at taking breaks, and it's like every time I actually take a good restorative break during the day, I'm like, "Oh, I really ought to do that more often." That was like, I come back to the desk and I'm like, oh, I'm ready to roll. And yet it's like, but I don't get those cues of, I might need to take a break until I'm like exhausted and my brain just feels fried.
Yeah. So it's not part of how you do things naturally, that without the external buffers or reminders or schedules, that your mind, your body would just hyper focus, go through things, work, do, go. And of course, all the benefits that come with that. But
To what point though?
yeah, the shadow, the downside, the burnout that comes with it too. And so, yeah, some good counterintuitive things that you would need to implement. And
So let's talk about strategies in just a moment. First, we're going to take a quick break so we don't burn out here. And we will be right back. Since 2014, support for this podcast has come from our award-winning intensive coaching and accountability groups. Learn more and get on our interest list at coachingrewired.com. Our spring registration event is happening next week on Tuesday, March 26th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 Eastern. That's coachingrewired.com to get started with your pre-registration process. Are you in search of a supportive space where you can gain practical skills, develop emotional acceptance, go from analysis paralysis to actionably adaptive, and engage with others who genuinely understand the experiences of living with ADHD? That's where ADHD reWired's coaching and accountability groups can help. Our intensive coaching program is specifically tailored for individuals with ADHD. We understand the unique challenges you face, from staying on task to managing time effectively, from dealing with overwhelm to maintaining motivation. You are not alone in your journey. Together, we'll set realistic goals, develop personalized strategies, and create structured accountability that makes sense for your life. Your ADHD doesn't need to define you in a negative way. And remember, ADHD is not a character flaw, because ADHD can and does make even what we think should be the simplest of tasks difficult. But with the right support and strategies, this spring can be a season of transformation, from just surviving with ADHD to thriving with ADHD. Plus, you're going to be part of an active and thriving ADHD community.
I'm most proud of my 18 group. I am part of such an amazing group of diverse people who share a common challenge. We have all grown and developed. We have taken on the challenges and been gentle with ourselves during times of learning, and we rocked it.
You guys helped me with getting through my overwhelm and the numbing and avoidance and paralysis. And I've always had everything just in my head. And now I can actually organize and, declutter, planify, prioritize, schedule, execute, all because of, the tools, I've learned in the last 10 weeks.
I know that making the decision to invest in your growth is rarely easy. We offer a number of flexible payment plans, including PayPal's 6 months interest-free financing. Plus, your investment not only includes the 10 weeks of coaching 3 times a week, it also includes 6 months of full access to all of the amazing sessions and activities we offer in our alumni membership community. Go now to coachingrewired.com to get your name added to our spring interest list so you can join us next week, Tuesday, March 26th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 Eastern, where we'll answer your questions, let you know what to expect, and to help you get registered for our upcoming spring season that starts on April 11th. If I did the math correctly, that is 3 weeks away. So don't wait. And if you have any questions, shoot us a message through our website or send an email to support@ADHDrewired.com. Growth happens here. The website, one more time, that's coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com. Hey, and if you are listening to this and know someone that you think would really benefit from this, send them the information. Send them the link to coachingrewired.com. We can't wait to meet you. All right, we are back with Nate Page. All right, so let's get into talking about some solutions, some strategies for really addressing burnout in a meaningful way once you're in the throes of it. Because I do want to look at once you're recognizing that, oh, I'm feeling burnt out. And I also, if we have time, would love to be able to talk about how do we prevent this so we don't kind of get into this cycle of burnout.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's talk about the Band-Aids first. So how do we, once we are in that state, what do we do?
Well, so at least what I can really talk about is from my perspective in working with people in therapy and individual and group settings is you want to do a good assessment. And you were already talking about this, Eric. If we're trying to find out what is the cause, how do I differentiate things? Because once I know the cause, then the solutions, the tricks, the hacks, the treatment just naturally follows that. And with burnout, we want to really look at what is causing the stress. And it can be so many different things. If we're just looking at the workplace, but if we're trying to understand the mismatch between how I am and my context and my family, my home life, other relationships. And so there's 6 categories, at least from the literature looking at work. And I go through those with clients to try to identify the different, hot spots is one way to say it, the way that the stress is really pushing on people day in, day out. The quantity is the place that people go to most, like, oh, I'm working too many hours. So yeah, that's important to think about, the intensity. But there's also big things like how much control do I really have? And it really can create burnout if I have a lot of responsibilities I need to take care of, but not the ability to really do that. So to choose how much I take on or to have access to the resources to be able to meet these demands. But it's also looking at relationships and maybe some of the toxicity or the pressures that you get from a boss or coworkers that don't really fit, that's creating too much stress. Fairness is a big one, and perceived unfairness. Like if I'm working really hard but not getting the credit for that, that can really burn people out. And then a big one is just a mismatch in values. If this is how I like to do things, this feels natural, congruent within me, but I'm in a job or another setting, or my spouse or something does things differently, but I feel like, oh, I have to do it in that way. And so day in, day out, I'm going against what feels right to me to do things in a different way. And so that creates that extra stress. And so in the Alcoholics Anonymous world, I think you do a fearless inventory is the phrasing that's used. So it's that kind of thing, to do a really fearless inventory of what are these things. And Eric, you were talking about boredom. And so if I'd be really curious, what are these boring tasks day in, day out that you're needing to do that are creating extra stress on you? And and if we're in a prevention place, how do we minimize those and get it back to where it's sustainable on a day-to-day basis? I can do enough boring things and recover enough for the next day, so to speak. If you're in the throes of burnout, it is more of, we need to figure out a way to, for a while, really reduce that, get the stress down, and the metaphorical stress fracture that you have, that's not going to recover by just reducing things. It's going to recover if you have enough time where you're not facing those stressors. So yeah, hopefully this is helpful for any listeners to try to think through, my relationships, the values that I have. What is the stress that is causing those soul injuries?
That fairness one is really interesting. I don't think that we often think about that in the context of like what makes us feel like we're in a good flow in our work setting.
So
can you talk a little bit more about the
workplace setting? My mind just popped to even do like relationship counseling.
Okay.
And so I have sometimes clients that they'll start to say, well, yeah, why is it that we always watch the movie that my partner wants to watch, or go to the restaurant they want to? Or so sometimes seeing those mismatches in a relationship, and I feel like I'm the one that I'll continually take on the stress, and it doesn't seem like my partner does that. So that's and at least the metaphor that I used in the ADHD presentation you went to is we're searching for the pebbles in the shoes that create those extra stressors. So in your workplace setting, or with being at whatever it is, and in particular folks with ADHD, and it's something now that I'm in the ADHD world, and I was diagnosed, I think 2 or 3 years ago. And so a lot of my clients always were neurodiverse. I just didn't kind of know it, that we were a good match. But really,
So we tend to all find each other. Like I think
I know.
even the undiagnosed
Yes.
professionals out there who are like, it's just weird. Like all my clients seem to have ADHD. Oh, and I think I have it too. I mean, the number of times I've heard that story from a professional, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, and then we could go down that path. But yeah, with AD, so I'm just doing it so much more with my clients and clinicians. Like, what are the mismatches with you and your ADHD and your context? What's the demands that are placed on you day in, day out? And it's so fun too when we get to do that work of, oh yeah, if I could just change this or that. And the presentation you did, Eric, at the ADHD conference was looking at AI and different ways and hearing. So I think you have done that in so many ways when you walk into your house and you just have the systems in place, and you're hopefully at least able to reduce so much stress that otherwise you would be burdening, by you being smart with setting up your context in a way that's really conducive to you. And
one of the things when I because I've been talking to my team about burnout, and we talk about how and even though I talk about this in my coaching groups, that and this comes from, I always forget the name of the author that wrote this book called Burnout, where it's not necessarily about eliminating the stressor, but it's actually about dealing with the stress itself, like the actual physical components of stress through like exercise. And what are your thoughts on how do we actually deal with this stress so it's we're managing it healthily and it doesn't pile on, creating this just awful exhaustion that ends up leading to burnout?
Yes. Well, yeah, and I should go check out the book if you're able to remember, because I mean that is really important. I see that all the time where we identify the stressors, but that it doesn't reduce the stress to get rid of that, because there's a new stress, or I'm stressed now that I don't have that, or yeah, I'm more stressed to talk to my partner about this discrepancy or talk to my boss. And so, yeah, it is the actual stress that's causing the injury. And I just have the experience so much with people that it is more stressful to try to reduce the stress. And so they've kind of found some sort of homeostasis in whatever their life is. And so it is one reason that I think the therapy can be helpful. It's helping people, well, how do I give myself that break inside my own head, inside my own skin? And it's something that's really helpful too in the group work, is being able to practice that with other people and have the vicarious learning, seeing other people do it, but other people be able to say, oh, come on, just give yourself a break. Just stop beating yourself up and thinking that you're maybe wrong or lazy or horrible in this way or that way. So I think maybe that's what you're getting at. Maybe that book was getting at.
Yeah, I just looked up. It's Emily Nagoski.
Okay.
I'm probably mispronouncing the last name, but that's the author of that book, Burnout. I think it was like exercise, sex, and like connection were like the three main things they talk about is ways to actually like address burnout or to address stress.
Yeah.
It's not just by taking a break, right? Which is what people sometimes think.
Yes. Well, and that's a fascinating thing, because so I work with a lot of college students, and there are a lot of college students with ADHD, and there is burnout while they're in school. But then when they're not in school, so changing that stressor does for them reduce the stress. But I think you and Emily in this book is getting at, of course, a lot of ways that, the stress is just high no matter what. And maybe, there is like a anxiety disorder at play as well. Or I think a lot of times, so maybe I'll share this. So one of the fascinating things for me when I was starting to think about ADHD, because I just thought, no, it's not ADHD. Anxiety is one of the big things for me my whole life. But when I really started working on the anxiety in my early mid-20s and my perfectionism, the imposter syndrome, as that went down, my ADHD symptoms were so much more present. And it kind of felt like they went up. And so when my anxiety goes up, the ADHD symptoms, they're not as visible. That's how I manage them, because when I'm more anxious, I don't lose things as much. I can be more organized. I can pay attention more. It takes a lot of energy. And so I think with ADHD in particular, there's people that pressure, that anxiety, that stress is so valuable that even if I change my context, that still is going to be there. So yeah, I need to figure out with exercise, with sex, with human connections, how do I reduce that stress to where it's more at a breathe in, breathe out kind of way. as opposed to I'm just breathing it. It's just stress. So yeah.
Mm. And I imagine too is so much, I mean, this is also true for a lot of other disorders, but like comparing where you're at now to whatever your baseline is, right? Like, I'm getting agitated more with people. Like, well, is that a normal thing or is that a new thing? Or I'm like not caring about the stuff that I'm working on. Is that a new thing, or is that, is like tend to be your ML? Like, so I know for me, like I still love the work that I do. One of the things that I've been noticing about my own kind of burnout is sort of like lacking the brain space to create and to do new things and take on new projects, where it's just like, I think about doing it, my brain is just, it almost like locks itself. It's like, no, not, you're not doing that right now. Yeah. And so like when I'm in group, like I love being in group. Like, the thing that I think as an online business that I get sort of tired from is the registration cycles. It's like doing groups, registration, groups, registration. And it's like, there's part of me, and then I'm even apprehensive to say this on the podcast. I'm like, just come to the group. It's so fucking like effective. If people just like knew that, I don't mind the marketing to a certain point, but it's that feeling like I don't know. It's like that. It feels like I'm constantly having to hustle to fill the groups. And like, that's the thing that makes me feel exhausted. And that's the thing that I'm like, God, how do I make this easier? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a really, really good business model. And it's so helpful. And I know for me, like even I think the last podcast you posted was just you talking about the groups and at least on the audience side of things, it's so invigorating and inspiring to think, I could join that group and maybe. And so it's really valuable what you're doing. But yeah, for you on your end, it's probably more like I don't know if I can come up with an analogy on the spot, but popped in my head was like a parent, like, oh yeah, you need to do this again for my kids and they love it. But yeah, this is I don't know how many times you've been through, how many years. It's
10 years, 35 seasons now going into, so we've had, we're gearing, I think by the end of this one, we'll be near 1,200 people who have gone through our program. And it's amazing, incredible work. And like, I when I first started this work, I was like, so I don't know when this will happen, but I imagine I'll probably get bored of doing this at some point, right? Like just knowing how I am, like always needing novelty. And like, I'm not bored of the work itself, like the client-facing work, the leading groups, doing those things, like doing the podcast. Like I love that work. It's sort of like all the work that it sort of takes sometimes to be able to do the work is where I'm like, okay, more marketing.
Well, I so resonate with that. And so when I'm with a client or like right now talking with you, or when I show up for the group sessions that I do, I don't get bored of that. I don't get, and I'm in a good place. I did on internship, it was too much and there's too many therapy clients, too many days, too much stress with that. But it's been several years. But yeah, it's all those things outside of that, the marketing, the paperwork, the payroll, there's just so many things that it gets harder and harder and harder.
Well, I am definitely grateful for the session that I attended with you and getting to do that with a couple members of my team, because right after we had spoken, my marketing person, in a couple of weeks from this recording, so I think I'm now about 40 days away from being in Mexico. I'm going for a week to go see the band Fish. This is the second time I'm going to see them. They do this 4-night run at this all-inclusive resort. I mean, Fish is my very favorite band. Seeing live music is like my happy space. So this is like my dream come true, and I get to do it again, right? And she says to me, I know you're taking this week off in February. What if you also took the week before and the week after off? And because one of my goals last year was actually to take the fall season off of coaching completely. And just the way kind of the economy was, it's like, it wasn't in the cards. Right. And so it's like, the beginning of the year, I was sort of anticipating this sort of taking a little bit of a sabbatical, and then it not kind of coming to fruition. So when she suggested this, what if I took this 3-week break? I can't even explain how just that suggestion made me feel 50 pounds lighter. And I was like, that actually seems doable. So I first, checked with my team, and so I have coverage for my groups and all that. And, it's interesting too, because when I was, doing some marketing for this season, I was talking to my team about, well, what if I just share, that this is what I'm doing? And they're like, well, they're not really sure if that's going to be the best approach to, and I'm like, but you know what? Like, if all the things that I am, I think transparent is one of the key things that I am. So it's like, yes, I love the work that I am doing, and it's in 2024 now. So over the last, say, 4 years, we've dealt with a pandemic. I got divorced. There was a time not that long ago before that I was actually running 3 groups at a time. Now I only do 1 at a time now. So like, there's a lot of things that have just sort of added up and it, I guess, brought me to where I'm at right now, where it's taking that break is to me, I feel, is so essential for the longevity of what I'm doing.
Well, just as you said that, and you mentioned, going through a divorce, running 3 groups, and it sounds like I just feel that in my gut. It's pain that I'm feeling, and I mean, of course, pain in a lot of ways, not just burnout pain there, but it sounds like way overdue. This 3 weeks off, and trying to figure out some ways to really heal. So that's what burnout recovery is. That you take the time off, enough time that you need, and when people are really in the throes of burnout, it's 6 to 18 months.
I hear you say that, and I was like, oh shit.
And nobody wants to hear that, and it's not realistic, and so there's that. But it's taking the stress away and really having that break and giving yourself enough time to heal and recover. And it does take time, and there's lots of things to do. And the connections with people, the sex, the exercise, all those types of things are really, really helpful. But if it's a chronic tendonitis, stress fracture injury that we're dealing with, you need a big, big break.
Well, we have time for a quick small break right now. When we come back, maybe we can come up with talk about some strategies when you do have some time off to really, like, how do we maximize the sort of restorative nature of taking some time off? So we will do that when we come back. All right, we are back with Nate Page. All right, so I got this vacation coming up. Right in the middle of that vacation, I'm going to be in Mexico seeing my favorite band. The week before I go and the week after I go, what would be some of the things that you would suggest? And this is not just for me. I want this also for listeners who are like, okay, I have this week off. Like, because I know for myself, I've had times where I've had a little bit of time off and I flounder because I don't have the structure of what to do, right? Which is also stressful.
Yes. And especially for someone like you, it sounds like you really do thrive with the work, go, do.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. So what's how do we really maximize the recharge effect of taking time off? Well,
so some thoughts I have is, so I don't necessarily know ways to speed up recovery, and so I do think, even though that's a soul injury, but it's not necessarily physical, but it is physical. It actually really is physical. But there is that kind of, the body heals itself, your mind, your psyche, it heals itself. So I think that's another kind of bit of a downer statement. People don't want that. Like, oh, what's the hack, the way to supercharge in 3 weeks?
Yeah, it's just so listeners know. So I have kind of this big grin on my face right now because basically my last 2 therapists have, in different words, have basically said to me, Eric, slow the fuck down. And it has to do with the work in therapy, right? Like, I want to jump in. Right now I'm in month 6, in EMDR therapy, working on, I've been diagnosed with complex PTSD. And, the first, I think it was the second session that I had with this therapist, and it was my first EMDR session. I'm just like, yeah, all this pre-work we need to do in the EMDR with this resource. I'm like, let's just get into it. Come on, let's get into it. I'm tired of feeling this way. And she's like, well, I don't think we should do that, but okay. So at the end of that session, and the beginning of the next session, she so what do you think about the slowing down approach? I'm like, yeah, that's a really good idea. I should have listened to you, because it was too much too fast. And so hearing you say you can't really speed up recovery, I'm like, damn it, themes, patterns.
Yeah, ugh, it's rough. And but yeah, if you go to a doctor and you have a stress fracture and they say, oh, it's 6 months in the boot or whatever, or 6 weeks in the boot, there isn't. I mean, yeah, you can eat better. The nutrition helps, and to reduce your stress, and hearing you sort of mention the complex PTSD, and so yeah, there's real stress there from that probably for you, it's, I don't know, with the nightmares, emotional flooding, the avoiding stimuli, all these things. And the research that I was doing the other week, because I do a lot of ADHD assessments with adults, trying to help them understand, is this ADHD or anxiety, depression, PTSD, or is it both? And there was, at least what I'm remembering, was folks with ADHD are 8 times as likely in that research study to develop PTSD.
Not surprising to me at all.
Yeah. So there's just that added stress that you're dealing with. It's internalized. Of course, there's the real external traumas that created that, and if it's complex, probably multiple ones, but then it becomes internalized. So yeah, we're not just talking about burnout. And so so with your 3 weeks off, I'd follow your gut. I'd be very, very, very kind to yourself. Yeah, lots of love, compassion. The only thing that I'm really aware of in the literature that is really inversely correlated with burnout is compassion. So not empathy. I mean, this is kind of an interesting thing. So empathy toward yourself or towards others, but the compassion. So those feelings of love, probably the connection that Emily's talking about in her book. And so really treating yourself as kindly as you can, lots of love. And of course you're burned out, and of course this and that, and that's okay. And you're okay. And then other things that I think are helpful are what does help you feel alive, and what helps you thrive, what's kind of the opposite of the burnout. And it sounds like you are doing that with going to the Fish concerts, and
makes me think that I need to make a note to see if there's a way that I can rent a motorcycle while in Mexico. Because when you say what makes you feel alive, I'm like riding my motorcycle, playing pickleball, playing music. I mean, those are the things that make me feel alive. And I have been very intentionally trying to add more and more of those things in my life. And part of it too is I'm very sort of consciously trying to also work a lot less, which I do feel it's helping. I do feel it has been preventing new scars from forming. Because, like a lot of people with ADHD who are also business owners, in the start of my business, I would do the 80 to 100 hour work week regularly.
Oof.
Yeah. And it's like, as the way our culture is, there's this tendency to sort of wear that as a badge of honor. And it's so perverse and so just unhealthy.
Yes.
That, now I'm working maybe about 30 hours a week, and I feel it's way more sustainable based on where I was, with some fluctuations here and there. But yeah, the what makes you feel alive, it's a question that we actually ask our coaching group members when we're doing our yearly planning. Like, what makes you feel alive, right? Because it's like, it's not just about getting the goals done. It's like, because that's not what life is. It's like, what really makes you energized? What would we do when, it doesn't matter how much time is passing because we love what we're doing?
Yes.
And it's so funny too when it's like all these things that we forget and yet we know to do.
Right. But yeah, it's not built into our systems, and especially our culture here in the US, where productivity equals your worth. So you're facing all the stress of being countercultural to go down to 30 hours a week, which hearing that was like, oh, good work. And that is sustainable, hopefully. And the 80 to 100.
Yeah, it's
needed sometimes for short term but not
a
sustainable.
lifestyle though. Not exactly. We are running out of time here. What, I don't know, maybe just share some final thoughts, and then how can people reach you and sort of leave listeners with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing I think is really helpful is to get as many people involved as you can in your burnout recovery, or people that really will support you. And so I find myself doing that more and more with therapy clients. Like, if we can, let's connect with your boss, your employer, your colleagues, your spouse, your family, your children, your friends, because we are needing to make big changes if we can, and change the structure, change the context, and as many people as we can get that are in your corner. And the analogy that I always go back to is that so often it feels like I'm an athletic trainer working with an athlete who's injured, but nobody else really knows it or wants to know it. So the coaches, the teammates, the fans, the parents, they're like, no, keep playing, keep going. It's really important. But when the coaches, the fans, everyone figures out like, oh, you're injured, you have a stress fracture or a pulled hamstring or whatever metaphor you want to use, then it's like, oh, no. Yeah, you don't go to practice. Let's recover. Let's help you. So it changes the whole game. The way you're talking about things is you're doing that, and you're the people that you're surrounding yourself with that care about you, that are also, I think, your coworkers. They're saying, nope, let's take the week before and the week after off. And when that happened, you just felt it like, yeah, that is right. I wouldn't have probably done that myself, but I have this support team here.
Because it did kind of feel this like, oh, wait, I was maybe having this all or nothing thinking. It's either I take a whole season off of coaching or nothing. It's like, oh, wait, there's this middle ground. I can do that middle ground.
Yeah. And it's a really good experiment. And we'll see. Yeah, maybe that was enough, or maybe you want 4 weeks next time. Or
and what you said there too about experimentation. I mean, that's life, right? Like, we have to embrace those experiments. Like, we don't know what's going to work or not going to work. Right, we don't know what we're going to love or not love. We only know by experimenting.
And there was a woman in the presentation that we were at that talked about the cycles of burnout and going through it many times. And I think that's a really helpful thing, to be like, well, how do I level up, get better this time? Constantly be improving, and you've done so much, and you're trying to figure out what's the next way to level up with my burnout recovery. And for people wanting to connect with me, is that where you were going?
That's exactly where I was going.
Yeah, reach out to me. Google my name, Nate Page. I run a website, grouptherapycentral.com, so you can connect with me through there. I love doing presentations on burnout. I've gone into a lot of organizations, but I do a lot of individual therapy work. I am probably going to be licensed in 36, 37 states with the way that psychologists can do things through. But I'd love to, be part of, any projects or things people are doing. And so don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I'd like to play with this, and I'll say no if I'm not in a place to say yes. If I'm full at the buffet right now, but right now I'm more like, no, I'll play with anyone. I'll play with you, Eric, and be on your podcast. And so, don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, thank you so much. This was a great conversation, and I appreciate the work that you were doing. I think it is really, really important work that people are hearing. So we will put a link to where people can reach you in the show notes of this episode that is available on your podcast app or on our website. Nate Page, thank you so much.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure.
And that's all for this week. A big thanks to Dr. Nate Page for taking the time to talk with me for this episode. And thank you for making it to the end of this episode. If you want show notes and resources mentioned in today's show, head over to the website, ADHD rewired.com. Do you have thoughts about burnout? Want to start a discussion? Apply to become part of our free and secret Facebook community at the website. Want to support the show? Why not become a patron at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. Members at $5 a month or more can get full uninterrupted episodes of this show with the announcements at the very end. And if you sign up at $25 a month, you can join me and other patrons for a monthly coaching call that we do every fourth Tuesday of the month. Then if you are looking for an ADHD-friendly co-working space to help you keep on task while you tackle your to-do list, why not check out our ADHD-friendly body doubling community at adultstudyhall.com. We currently have 11 facilitated sessions each week, and our 24/7 quiet co-working room is always open. Oh, and we're trying something new. Each week, I'm getting together with fellow coaches Kristen Martz and Brian Entler for our Coaches Roundtable. We are aiming to keep those conversations between 15 to 20 minutes, and if you want to check those out, we'll have our most recent episodes that we've streamed on YouTube linked in the show notes. Otherwise, you can find it all at the website, from our coaching groups to our Facebook community, adult study hall, and more at ADHD rewired.com. Thanks again to Dr. Nate Page for joining me on the podcast today. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see y'all next week.